So actually, the main story that I've been telling over the past shy of 2 years is like how we went bankrupt. Not that that's much of an accomplishment. But apparently I've become a pretty popular guy to talk about fucking shit up. So I'm pretty excited about actually talking about some of the things that we did right while we were fucking other stuff up. So that's, I'm very happy to be. Just wanted to say that. Briefly about Admazely, what we did is that we were a retargeting company. So retargeting works like a consumer visits a web shop and leaves the web shop, and then you can retarget using ads and make the consumer come back and buy the stuff that he was still interested in. So it's like ad stalking, basically. You've all seen it. What we did was that we found a pretty clever way of doing that, where someone had a web shop, could use our technology to crawl and scrape the entire site for products. Then we applied some very clever machine learning, and then we would give them a UI with all the products and some unique banners, which was at that point in time a pretty cool service that no one else was really offering. So briefly, that's what we did. So we sold our stuff to web shops, which is far more interesting actually for this case rather than what we did specifically. So this is a timeline with our active customer base. We did a lot of R&D here. We didn't have any, and then we sort of got the first few customers, and we raised some money around here. A seed round of about $500,000, and then we had to get some more money because we would run out in a year, and we were very confident that we could do that because it had been very easy to raise the first round of money. It turned out to be not quite as easy to raise the second round of money. We were fundraising here when we had sort of very little momentum, and then we were told in February, before we sort of had February figures, that sorry guys, we're not giving you any money. And then we did this, which was a bit of a shame. And then we went bankrupt up there. So that was a bit disappointing, I have to say. But nevertheless, so like my first lesson here is not for growth hackers, it's for founders. So you might want to gain traction before you to raise money, which is obviously easier than said than done. But nevertheless. So what I want to talk about actually is more like the last sort of the things that we did to gain this momentum in these last 3 months, rather than the miserable story of how we went bankrupt and I got all depressed and stuff. So this is our sales funnel, and we had some conversion rates. We just talked about from the beginning out here. So like ideally we wanted recurring revenue. That's pretty much what you want as an enterprise startup, especially one that is software as a service. So the way that we did this was basically that we would call people up, we would talk to them, then we would give them a demo, and they would agree to a pilot or trial project, and then they would become happy and become recurring revenue. So, and we had some conversion rates around that. The investor that we had, Seed Capital, had some pretty fresh memory from Trustpilot, which had the same basic model. So we had some pretty good benchmarks, and we were very fortunate to talk to other people who have been doing this telesales model. So like understanding how we were performing compared to very successful companies was pretty helpful in trying to sort of find out where do we need to target these different things. I'll come back to some of this, but just start by saying that these are the percentages. But like the main thing that people told us was that the volume of calls that we made per sales rep was extremely low, extremely inefficient. So we ended up figuring out this is probably what we really needed to optimize. So that's, for me at least, that was the big growth hack that we did. So I'll save that for last. Leave you all in excitement for now. Let's go back one. Like the growth hacker lesson here is to like try to quantify this from day one, very early on. Even if you have very limited sort of data volume, then like try to look at data, try to be very data driven or insights driven in all of this. So measure from day one, even when you're only doing 10 calls a day, then still figure out like how successful are you. Otherwise you won't know if you're improving, you won't know if you have a problem. So try and do that. A lot of the people that we talk to like Trustpilot, for instance. They were saying, yeah, so we have Salesforce. Then we have these very cool integrations with other technologies that will then measure automatically how many calls a sales rep does per hour and per day, and spit out a lot of charts. And then I looked at like a license fee for Salesforce and kind of realized that was probably not sort of what we wanted to do. What we were doing at the time was that we bought some prepaid Skype accounts, and then we just like get called from that. We started using the free stuff, which would like fall out all the time, so which again didn't really do much for our conversion rates. So we bought some paid ones at like 100 and 200 pros at the time, and we were calling. So to quantify this, like we would extract the Skype logs for each of the sales rep manually to begin with, and then we would slowly automate them. And then we would put it in Excel, and we would manipulate and say, okay, so we may have a call, but if it's less than 90 seconds, then it's not really a conversation. Then it's probably just like calling the reception, or the phone was busy, or we couldn't reach the right person. So at first we just sort of like had a conversion rate call to demos, and then that turned out to be a little bit meaningless. So we added this. We had the sales reps, that being me included, register manually in this Soho CRM, which was like $25 a month, so that was pretty manageable. And then we would consolidate all of these things, and we could measure, of course, how many customers we had by the amount of invoices that we sent, which we use the economic for, which I'm sure you all know. So seriously, there's like quantify and get the different data sources together very early on, so you have an idea what's going on. And now a few actual hacks. So, like the first thing that we didn't really do was solve this whole pilot to monthly recurring revenue, because you didn't deliver enough value, which was in many cases. Let me just see, yeah. Related to the fact that we had no idea what we were doing with the actual retargeting. We just saw some companies who were catering to very big companies be very successful, and we figured that it can be very hard to do that. Like the trick is the stuff that makes it work with the machine learning for the small customers, the whole crawling scraping bit. So like my initial assumption was like, surely this is as easy as scratching my own ass to actually make this work. And then I went, okay, fuck, that's not so much. So I had to go into like the system that we were using, the ad server that we were using to actually traffic the ads. Very similar to like a Facebook advertising interface and so forth. And then I would say, okay, I'm spending a lot of time in this interface looking at reports, and it's very inefficient, because then I have I have 10 or 20 campaigns running, and if I segment them, it explodes. So it was not very scalable. So we tried to do some nice automated data extraction to Excel, and we did like shitloads of pivot tables on a lot of different parameters, and we learned a lot from that. And then at one point in time, we also said, well, actually we got a PhD in machine learning, a theoretical physicist in our team. Maybe they can help us with this whole data thing. Which obviously they could, but by the time we sort of got to this realization, we were very close to bankruptcy, so we didn't really harvest the full benefits of this, and they were busy doing other stuff. The next thing, like the demo to pilots, this is where we were actually performing extremely well. Like the conversion rate of everyone we actually got to talk to and show the product. Then 6 in 10 said, that sounds awesome, I'd like to pay you some money to try that out. We're very happy with that, and like compared to sort of early days of Trustpilot, we were really even kicking their ass on this parameter. Obviously not on every other single parameter in driving a business, but for this one. But the product didn't quite work. It didn't really do what we wanted it to do yet. So we had to do a product hack for this. And one of our developers, he saw that we got two customers that were using Shopify as their web shop platform, and he noticed that actually the sitemap was constructed in the exact same way, and he looked into it and found out that like there were some similarities because it's like a standard product. That meant that it was done in the exact same way. So like all of the stuff that made the product not really work across every website in the world didn't really apply to every Shopify web shop in the world. So every Shopify web shop in the world, we could do a hack, and then the product would work immediately with all of those. So we went to BuildWith, awesome website, buildwith.com, and then we used that to find all of the Shopify shops that we could come across. And then what we could do is that that we could then pre-populate our demos with the actual customer's own shop and own products, and that meant that the whole demo to pilot conversion was a hell of a lot better than even the very good 60%. So that was very uplifting. And that kind of sort of got us started with a lot of other ideas as well. For instance, like the process that we had with the Shopify shops was on every other aspect very similar to what we had with the old shop built on anything. But with Shopify we could automate it, so we started automating a lot of stuff and tried to be more marketing driven with this, so we didn't need the whole hand holding. But we never really got to the bottom of that. But as Cole was saying just now, and as I think that Matthias probably also had one of his points with Facebook, is that like try to find niche audiences that you can optimize for. Try to find like these thin slices in the market that you have something special to offer, and then offer that to those, because it's regardless, especially if you're very early days, it's a really good platform for learning a lot of stuff, and maybe also to like do a hockey stick graph, which obviously makes it easier if you're a VC-backed company and you need to raise money. Yeah, I just said that. And then the whole like call to conversation ratio was also like that was not really a hack. I was just trying to coach the people that were doing it, like giving them some sales training and all of these different things. So no magic to that. But the big thing was like this is where we were really wasting time and money in this process, and we didn't really have an idea. It was only because like we looked at the actual numbers, like how many calls per day did the sales rep perform, and then we were shitty at that, extremely shitty. And we spent a lot of time talking about it. And this is sort of what our idiocy in this looked like. So we had some segments. We wanted to target small to medium-sized web shops. We wanted to talk to the sort of owner, manager, or the marketing manager, and we wanted them in the UK. And the process was that we would go out and buy a Dun Bradstreet database. And you can't buy web shops from Dun Bradstreet in the database. You can buy like companies with revenue between X and Y. So we bought some of those, and then we sat down, and then we had people find these companies online, visit their website, try to figure out if they actually sold something online. And in most cases they didn't, so we couldn't really use that lead at all. And then we had just spent anywhere between like 10 and 20 minutes figuring that out. Maybe not 20, but too much time at least to do on thousands and thousands of leads. Yeah, and then if they did have a website, then we need to find the telephone number, then we need to call the reception, ask for the name of the guy in charge of this, and then try to, after that, convince the receptionist to transfer us, which is a hell of a lot more difficult in the UK than it is in Scandinavia. Very sort of, or at least more hierarchical in their structures. So this was an extremely inefficient process that we had going here, and like the last time we had one of these events, I think all of the speakers tried to come up with like a definition of what is growth hacking, and I have my own, so I'm going to share that with you if I can remember it. To me, like growth hacking is something about combining like computer skills and sales and marketing skills to apply non-linear problem solving to otherwise linear problems. So it's not just about like optimizing little things that are obvious. It's about trying to do something that can actually makes a difference that is an order of magnitude. And I think that's what we ended up actually achieving. So the new process was that we defined a segment. So we want to target fashion web shops, for instance. Then we would brainstorm for what, within fashion, what are 200 search terms that people will use when finding a website within fashion. So like women's jeans or men's shirts, or all of these different types of things. Then we would use Google Keyword Planner. And we would type all these in Google Keyword Planner, and then that would become thousands of keyword searches that were related. So it was a very good way of sort of scaling our own ideas for finding potential leads in all of this. Then we wrote a little robot that was a crawler, not this one, but I couldn't really find the one that we did. So all know what a crawler and a robot is, so I'm not going to spend time on that either. So the bot would then type in search terms, all of these thousands and thousands of search terms one at a time into Google, and it would get results. Perform thousands of Google searches, and then it would look at the AdWords. So who were advertising, searching for, or who were willing to pay money for people looking at these types of products. So obviously they had something to sell, and they had a marketing budget already there. We were having like far more qualified people that we could call. So this way we would get like tens of thousands of leads into a database. Then the bot would click the site, or click the ad, visit the site. It would look at the source code, search for basket or cart, like things that would actually indicate that these are web shops instead of just random sites that couldn't do anything for. And then we would get a list of tens of thousands pre-qualified leads in this sense. Then we the bot again would take all of these things and then would hammer it into to Alexa, which is like a traffic estimating tool for the different sites. And we kind of like use this to also find our sweet spot, because some sites were too large and some were too small. But this way we would get an Alexa rank for all of these different ones, and pretty fast we knew sort of how to disregard the ones that were too big or too small. And this way we would get a list of, again, tens of thousands of very, very qualified leads. Then we would give them to interns. I think this is one of the beautiful things about the Anglo-Saxon countries, is that they have a very, very beautiful tradition of doing unpaid internships. Gotta love that in a startup. So we had a few interns. We'd give these to them. Then they would call the reception for info. They didn't want to try and get transferred to the right person. They would just say, "Hi, I'm just updating my database. Just wanted to make sure that Jenny Smith is still doing online marketing at your company." No, Jen, we've never had anyone called Jenny here. "Oh, so what should I put in my database then?" And then they would get the name of that person. And then they would hand over to sales, who would then give them an actual sales call. So this was a new process for doing these things that we, and I think it's fair to say that we sort of hacked our way to this optimization. And these were sort of our results before interest, taxes, depreciations, amortization, and bankruptcy. Where we got to. So, I mean, we did a lot of stuff wrong, as I said, but this actually worked out extremely well for us. And I think like the thinking that goes into this, I think is really trying to find, as I said again, if you're a software company, you have programmers. Use those programmers to tackle sales and marketing problems. And I mean, that's really what defines growth hacking. Otherwise, you're just like doing sales and marketing and applying marketing skills to your own job title, really. And some lessons learned for us in this case. Like work very much with this framework: hypothesis, experiment, data, insight, outcome. So be very hypothesis driven. We were very lucky that we had the sales funnel, and we had some input into like where we were doing well, where we were doing shitty. So we could develop some pretty good hypothesis around that, which worked out really good for us. Yeah, there are reasons why they test on guinea pigs before they test on humans. So like sort of find guinea pigs, find areas where you can test without really harming anything. Do cheap tests on places where you can afford to fail. Don't try to do a very big, expensive experiment, because if that fails, then you're probably pretty fucked anyway. So do these things small on guinea pigs before you roll your stuff out on humans. Leverage others to hack your learning curve. Look for people with domain knowledge. I've said it quite a few times. Like in our case, there were Danish startups who were very, very good at this enterprise telesales model, and we talked to a lot of them to get some input on how to do these things and understanding like how should we train them, what kind of skill set should we look for, what were the challenges that we were going to encounter. So do that, like talk to people, not just to hang out with other cool startup people, but to actually learn something from people, to know something about the problem that you're tackling. Yeah, and apply that resource to sales and marketing. There's a reason why software is in the world. It's because it allows us to do a shitload of things more efficiently than otherwise. So, especially if you are a software startup, by definition, you have these resources. Channel some of that into your sales and marketing efforts. Everything else is just a big fat waste, and you're developing a product that no one's going to buy because you don't market it well. Yeah, and then like learn to love the problem-solving process, not the specific solutions. So don't fall in love with wanting to solve a particular problem in one particular way. And from our own experience, like I said that we got really clever about like this whole finding a special solution for Shopify. The truth is that I think in like for 6 months we had everyone we talked to say, well, can you do something for like a specific niche, maybe a specific platform? We said, no. We want to do something that solves like the entire generic global problem at once. That's sort of what we're driven by, which was totally idiotic. We should like be driven by like the problem solving, not the specific solution. So like don't kill your darlings. Don't get married to specific ideas on how to solve a problem. Be very open and iterative about the problem solving itself. Lastly, what I wanted to say, and I thought he was going to be here today, so I asked him to stand up and point at him. But like I've said a lot of we in this process. And when I've said we, I've actually 9 times out of 10 I've meant a guy called Daniel Tronier, who is doing all of this stuff. He's an amazing guy. I'm not doing a startup right now, so I would recommend anyone looking for someone to help you with this growth hacking to grab a hold of him. He's really a kick-ass guy. If you have anything, feel free to get in touch. Twitter handle, email, and phone number. I'm very happy to answer any and all questions that you have in this context. Thanks a lot for your time.